Georgia O'Connor here. Big up Julius. Ring IQ. Welcome to the relay.
Welcome to the relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Who is the GWOAT, Andy? Is it Katie Taylor or is it Claressa Shields?
I think it's Katie Taylor. And the reason I do is just because, and this is Claressa Shields' bad luck, is that she hasn't got the dance partners that Taylor's had or still has. Shields has done what she's done in unbelievable fashion, like becoming undisputed 3 times. I would say Taylor is the GWOAT. And it sounds like a bit odd, but by default almost, because she's got better fighters around her and she's been in bigger fights and better fights. The fight against Marshall was sensational. And what a night. That was an unbelievable night.
Rob Tabbett of ID Boxing very recently sat down with Andy Clark to weigh in on who's really the GWOAT? Who's really the greatest woman of all time?
Who is it?
Katie Taylor or Claressa Shields? And you heard Andy Clark echo a familiar sentiment that I've expressed here on the channel many times. And it's not that Claressa Shields doesn't have a great resume, she does.
She's a hell of a fighter.
But the talent pool simply isn't as deep at 154, 160, or 168 pounds for that matter. These divisions where Claressa Shields has reigned and campaigned as a champion, the talent pool isn't anywhere near as deep at any of those 3 weights as it is down there at lightweight and super lightweight. The neighboring divisions to Katie Taylor's. For a perspective, at middleweight, where Claressa Shields currently reigns as that division's undisputed champion, there's a grand total of 22 girls worldwide. Just 22 girls. 22, that's it. Compared to 151 girls registered worldwide at lightweight. 151. It is a numerical and statistical fact that lightweight is a deeper division than middleweight. There are only 22 girls ranked worldwide in today's middleweight division, 31 at super middleweight, 64 at junior middle. You could take the sum total of fighters ranked at junior middle, middle, and super middle, and it still wouldn't add up to 151 ranked lightweights, 151 ranked fighters. It is just a matter of fact that lightweight, the sum total of fighters ranked at junior middle, middle, and super middle comes out to just 117 girls, still falling short of the mark. Still falling short of 151 ranked fighters, 151 ranked lightweights, where Katie Taylor campaigns. And don't forget about the neighboring divisions, super featherweight, and super lightweight. These are also deeper divisions than either junior middle, middle, or super middle. The relevance of all of this is that it's a lot harder to become an undisputed champion in a densely populated weight class. Moreover, it's a lot harder to stay a champion because there are so many fighters around. The depth of Katie Taylor's resume greatly dwarfs. I mean, this is what Andy Clark is talking about, that it's not Claressa Shields' fault that there aren't more junior middles and super middles. It's not Claressa's fault that there aren't more girls campaigning at those weights, but that's just the situation. That's just the way it is. The way it breaks down, yes, Claressa Shields has been a 3-time undisputed champion at 3 separate weights, but she hasn't actually fought more champions than Katie Taylor. Katie Taylor's fought more champions at 2 weights than Claressa's fought in 3. Moreover, Katie and Claressa debuted as professional boxers in the same year, 2016. Since then, Katie Taylor's fought 21 times. 21 fights to Claressa Shields' 13. 13 since 2016. Like I said, it's not a knock on Shields. It's not her fault there aren't more fighters at those weights, but the talent pool really is a lot deeper at lightweight and super lightweight than junior middle, middle, or super middle. So where ESPN and Ring Magazine might rank Claressa Shields as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in women's boxing, guys like Andy Clark and myself, we see it differently. Here you have one fighter who's beaten more champions than the other and campaigns at a deeper, more difficult weight to campaign in than the other. Bear in mind, she's about to have another fight, yet another fight this weekend against Karen Carabajal. Unbeaten Karen Carabajal of Argentina. And you know how it works. You know how it goes. If Katie falters, then Claressa Shields will enter into that #1 spot by way of the process of elimination. But if Katie secures the W, if Katie wins, she keeps that #1 spot. That's the way it is. Oftentimes, this becomes a subject of debate due to tribalist, nationalist sentiments. But I don't give a fuck who you like more, and I don't give a fuck who you've got more in common with. I don't give 2 forensic fucks who lives closer to your house. Or two floral pattern shits who you identify with more. You are not the subject. It's not a knock on Shields, but it seems to me that a lot of her supporters don't actually know the ball from the bounce. All they know is she's a 3-time undisputed champion without realizing, hey, you know, it's a lot easier to become an undisputed champion at those weights than it is to become one down there at lightweight, where there were 4 separate world champions at the time. We've already had this conversation. So long as Katie Taylor stays in the winner's bracket this weekend, she'll retain that #1 spot on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. There is a question as to how she's going to look. This will be her first fight since the epic war with Amanda Serrano, their showdown earlier this year. Quite honestly, one of the best fights I've ever seen, male or female fights. Katie took a lot of hard shots in that fight. She took a lot of hard punches. She's going out there against Argentina's own unbeaten Karen Carabajal. Karen Carabajal, who's going to be fighting in the biggest fight of her life, the biggest fight of her career. You know, fighters tend to rise to the occasion when that happens. Will we see a better Karen Carabajal than the one we've seen in the past? This being the biggest fight of her career. And will Katie Taylor's performance be up to scratch? I shudder to think that Katie Taylor may be approaching the end of her career, but let's not kid ourselves. She's 36 years old. She's already had most, if not all, of the legacy fights that she can have. She's been in there with some big punchers, very big punchers. Jessica McCaskill, Delphine Perstoon, Christina Lenardatu, more recently Amanda Serrano, Natasha Jonas. Katie Taylor's been very good to the sport, very good for the sport. But at 36 years old, given the kind of career that she's had, every time she gets out there now, there's a question hanging over her head. There's a question as to whether or not Father Time has started to catch up. Karen Carabajal hasn't fought the kind of fighters that Katie's fought, had the wars that Katie's had, but that's the point. A fresh fighter. Is Karen Carabajal catching Katie Taylor at the most opportune time? That's the question, and we'll get the answer to that question this weekend when Katie Taylor returns. And we'll see if she can hang on to that #1 spot. That #1 spot on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. In other news, the British Boxing Board of Control released this statement in reference to Conor Benn's ongoing situation. The failed VADA test, the cancellation of the Chris Eubank Jr. fight, all that jazz. And the statement from the British Boxing Board of Control reads, by a notice dated 17th of October 2022, Mr. Conor Benn was called by the board of the BBBOC to attend a hearing to deal with allegations of misconduct pursuant to Rule 25.11. The hearing took place on the 21st of October 2022. On the morning of the hearing, Mr. Benn voluntarily relinquished his license with the BBBOC. In accordance with its rules and regulations, the board determined the allegations following the hearing at which Mr. Benn was legally represented, the allegation of misconduct against Mr. Benn were upheld. So he voluntarily relinquished his boxing license. That's the story. It's unclear as to why he did that. One might be left to assume that the reason that Conor voluntarily relinquished his boxing license is you can't ban a guy from boxing that ain't got a license to box. Waste resources trying to ban a guy that ain't got a boxing license in your jurisdiction. Not dissimilar to what Tyson Fury did all those years ago after he tested positive for a banned substance and he was under investigation by UKAD. He decided to call impromptu retirement and absconded from the sport for approximately 2 years. Can we expect Conor Benn to do the same thing? Conor Benn, whose team responded after the BBBOC revealed he had relinquished his boxing license. The statement from Conor Benn reads, Conor's focus at this time is solely on clearing his name. The board, however, has made it extremely difficult for Conor to focus on doing that by its conduct of an unfair and biased procedure. In such circumstances, Conor decided not to renew his license, which had lapsed. Conor told the board that if it did not accept that his license had lapsed, then he renounces it. They're not exactly pointing out what were the biased and unfair procedures that Conor's talking about. What specifically? You know, initially, I said that the longer this drags on and the longer this drags out, the more it's going to remind people of Conor Benn's failed VADA test, and that pursuing any legal action at all, it's going to be a constant reminder of that. It's going to keep the story fresh. It's going to keep people talking about it. I mean, guys testing positive for banned substances in the sport of boxing, you can literally spit in the wind and hit a guy in this sport that tested positive for something. How many guys that have tested positive for banned substances have scheduled fights right here today? Tyson Fury tested positive for a banned substance, but he's fighting in December against Derek Chisora. Jarrell Miller, who tested positive on 2 occasions. He's got a fight scheduled. So does Dillian White. How is it that all of these offenders and some repeat offenders, how is it that they found their way back to the sport? And it's because some time passed and tempers cooled and people forgot. I mean, that's essentially what happened. People stopped caring, even right here and right now. Oscar Valdez, who tested positive for a banned substance, there's a story out that he's supposed to be returning to action against his countryman, Emmanuel Navarrete, very soon. And you don't hear people talking about his banned substance fiasco anymore. People stopped caring because the story stopped making headlines, whereas with Conor, you know what it really is? You've already got so many people that have an axe to grind with Eddie Hearn that they're going to weaponize this story. Not because they hate Conor Benn, but because Conor's associated with Eddie and they hate Eddie. It's not even because they want boxing to be a cleaner sport, a cleaner and safer sport for the fighters, for the athletes. It's not any of those things. It's because they have an axe to grind with Eddie that they're going to weaponize this story as much as they can. And as long as the story is still out there, as long as it's still fresh, they'll still use it as ammunition. The statement from Conor Benn's team continues. He strongly refutes the allegation of misconduct, which, for the avoidance of doubt, is not in relation to the VADA issue. So this must be some other kind of separate issue UKAD's talking about, and firmly believes that an independent tribunal will reach a wholly different conclusion. At the appropriate time, Conor will speak out on this and on the doping allegation, to the extent that he can, whilst legal proceedings are ongoing. In the meantime, he reiterates in no uncertain terms that he is a clean athlete. Even more bizarre in association with all of this is that Chris Eubank Jr.'s father, Chris Eubank Sr., is also saying, he's saying that Conor Benn is innocent. I can't reconcile that Chris Eubank Sr., who was vehemently against this fight going through due to the stipulated catch weight that his own son agreed to, he's the one saying, he's the one beating the drum that Conor Benn is innocent. Chris Eubank Sr. has always been against this fight, and even now that news is broken that Conor Benn tested positive for a banned substance, it's not the banned substance he's harping about, it's the catch weight. It was the catch weight that he was against. Here and now, he's actually arguing Conor Benn's innocence, if you can believe that. I don't even know how to reconcile all of this. Why the hell would he be arguing that Conor Benn is innocent when there's a positive VADA test that says otherwise? How do you make sense of that? For my money, the damage is already done. Regardless of how all of this ends, no matter what Conor Benn goes on to do or what he goes on not to do, this will haunt him.
In terms of contamination, which is everything in the results of this test, which you'll hear from, so I have to be careful because I want to tell you more, leads to a contamination in this. When I talk about contamination can happen in a lab, and contamination can happen via various different means during a process, right? The B sample will only necessarily come back negative if there's been a contamination or a mistake in the laboratory. It's the same sample. So 99.9% of the times, the B sample will be exactly the same. It's been requested. I don't know the testing process with Conor. You'll hear from him. I would expect it to come back positive as well. Like, in all honesty, it generally always does. If it doesn't, fantastic. But the levels in this amount, surrounded by the other testing that took place, would lead to suggestion of contamination of some kind in this test.
I'm no lab tech, but it sounds a lot like what Eddie Hearn is saying, is that while VADA tests might have indicated that Conor Benn had a banned substance present in his system, the other tests at or around that time, they didn't find anything at all. And given the trace amounts of said banned substance found in Conor's system, it's possible that Conor's samples were contaminated in transit. That's what he's saying. Though if that's what Eddie Hearn is saying, he's essentially laying the blame for all of this on VADA. On VADA as a result of human error. If you're talking about contamination, cross-contamination, you're essentially saying that somebody at VADA made a mistake. I mean, that seems to be the defense. Without divulging major details of what Conor Benn plans to do to clear his name, that's what it sounds like.
Human error. And that human error would be on the part of VADA and their techs, their lab techs.
I don't know how this is going to end. All I can say is that the damage is already done. This is something that is going to follow Conor Benn's career for as long as he dares to wear boxing gloves.
People are still going to reference it. They're going to periodically bring it up in conversation, regardless of what he goes on to accomplish.
I mean, I don't know. We'll just see what develops. Finally, in men's welterweight news, on the heels of the Crawford versus Spence fight's collapse, Jaron Ennis wonders why Team Crawford didn't offer him the fight.
Aren't you exclusively contracted to Showtime?
Jaron Ennis, like the rest of the world, was left dumbfounded when given the news. More than anything, the rising contender was under the impression that another former world champion was likely to be given the opportunity, not Avanesian. I was surprised, said Ennis in an interview with YSM Sports Media. I didn't think he was going to fight him. If anything, if he wasn't going to fight Spence, I thought he was going to fight Keith Thurman.
Money seems to be an issue when it comes to this Crawford versus Spence fight. And if the PBC and Showtime couldn't get the money together, if they couldn't make the numbers work for Crawford versus Spence, why would they be able to make the numbers work for Crawford versus Thurman?
He would essentially be dealing with the same people to make a fight. Even if it's a fight with a different fighter, he'd still be dealing with the same people. As the 25-year-old awaits their final decision, he begins to wonder why Team Crawford elected against picking up the phone to give him a call. If, however, Crawford did in fact offer Ennis his first crack at a world title, he reveals that his decision would have been a no-brainer. I ain't getting no phone call. I would have took that fight in a heartbeat. And I don't doubt Jaron Ennis' earnestness. I believe he would take that fight in a heartbeat if it were offered to him. But if it wasn't offered to him, it's likely because Jaron Ennis is exclusively contracted to box on Showtime.
Don't confuse Jaron Ennis with a network and promotional free agent. He isn't. He has a promoter, and he does box exclusively on the Showtime platform.
Even if he's not, and according to Hoyle, PBC fighter, in a situation where Crawford, hypothetically, offers Jaron Ennis the fight, okay, who's going to pay for it?
On what platform is it supposed to go down? On what platform is it supposed to be on? Because you're exclusively contracted to Showtime.
Wasn't he just dealing with the people over there at Showtime to try to get the Errol Spence Jr. fight over the line? If they couldn't get that fight over the line, how the hell are they going to get this fight over the line?
In some way, shape, or form, he'd still be dealing with the same people. Even if Al Heyman isn't involved, Showtime still is.
Jaron Ennis, he's not a PBC fighter. His promoter is Cameron Duncan.
So who's going to pony up the money to do the show? Who's going to pony up the money to do the fight between Crawford and Jaron Ennis? Cameron Duncan? Because Crawford's a network and promotional free agent.
Money's got to come from somewhere.
Where's the money going to come from? Is it going to come from Cameron Duncan? Does he have that kind of money? Who's the money going to come from? Is it going to come from Showtime that couldn't get up the money for Crawford versus Spence?
Just saying. Offering the fight to Ennis wasn't realistic.